You're struggling to build the momentum your company's AI initiative needs to really take off? In today's episode, we'll talk about how you can establish a governance model between technology and business to build that momentum. So let's jump right in. All right, so welcome to What's the Buzz, where leaders and hands-on experts share how they have turned hype into outcome. Today, we'll talk about establishing a strong governance between technology and business teams. And who better to talk about it than someone who's actively doing that in their business, Maxim Ioffe. Hey, Maxim, thank you so much for joining.
Thanks for having me.
Wonderful. Why don't you tell our audience a little bit about yourself, who you are, and what you do?
Sure. My name is Maxim Ioffe, and I drive Global Intelligence Center of Excellence for WESCO. WESCO is a Fortune 200 wholesale distribution company. It's about $22 billion annual. We are partnered with 50,000 suppliers, hundreds of thousands of customers, transacts millions of products with that scale. There is no shortage of automation, and my COE mission is to help everybody and anybody to be more effective and more efficient.
That's awesome. I love that. And, you know, you've been on the show before, and we talked about a pretty similar topic, but not quite the one about governance. So we wanted to make good on that now as well. Now, folks, if you're just joining the stream, drop a comment in the chat where you're joining us from. I'm always curious to see how global our audience is today. And also don't forget to pick up your copy of the AI Leadership Handbook so you can learn how you can turn technology hype into outcomes in your business. Now, Maxim, what do you say? In good old fashion, should we play a little game to kick things off?
Sure.
All right, so let's do this. If AI were let's see, if it were a plant, what would it be? 60 seconds on the clock. Go.
All right. It's probably going to be something from a cacti family. It's going to be difficult to climb. It's going to be difficult to handle, but if you handle it just right, those prickly pears are pretty delicious.
Wonderful. I love that. Really good answer, right? And there are all these little spikes. If you don't know that they exist, it can get you know, pretty interesting. So speaking of interesting, and you know, some of the spikes that I think business and technologists feel on a regular basis, how do we even work together, right? We want to do AI, we need to do AI, but how do we actually get everybody around the same table and move in the same direction? So you know, I keep hearing these concerns from IT leaders when it comes to adoption. We need to look at the data, we need to mitigate risk, we need to keep an eye on our costs. And you know, how can I become an innovation engine rather than, you know, being the braking pads, if you will? So I'm curious, what are you seeing in your role? How can IT, AI, automation leaders become an innovation engine while still keeping all these things in view?
That's a great question, and I don't think there is one size fits all answer that would cover every use case, every possibility, everybody and anybody. That's just not realistic, right? But I think fundamentally we have a couple of pillars there that needs to apply to building a successful model. First one is definitely strategy. And the strategy starts with something as basic as a mission. What is the mission of AI and broadly speaking, the automation program that we're trying to run? And I will do a simple example. A lot of missions seem to be going about, let's build autonomous enterprise. Let's build some sort of a self-driving engine. And then you turn around at the company and you see that corporate values are talking about people as the greatest asset. And how do you think our greatest assets fail if we say our mission is to build an autonomous enterprise, right? So crafting that mission, crafting those goals that resonates with business, that resonates with employees, that resonates with everybody and makes sense is a big part of the strategy. The other part of the strategy is defining what are we after? How do we calculate value? I don't want to use the word ROI. ROI seems to be a little bit limiting to some of those things, but at the end of the day, it is a financial calculation. How do we bring the finance in and tell us, hey, help us to define the appropriate levers and how do you calculate those? So you have the strategy around it. And then the other part of the strategy is probably the process selection and evangelizing. So you keep the stream of the processes, right? It's probably not that hard to find the first project to work on. Maybe first two, three, four. But how to get into hundreds? In our program, we had a small milestone. We have more than 500 ideas in the automation hub that are either implemented or being worked on. And 500 ideas is not a end to the game, it's just the beginning. We're going to keep growing. We're going to keep adding more and more and more. And frankly, that's 500 is what's live now. There is a number that were already automated and archived because they outlive their usual lifespan. And there is nothing wrong about that as well. So that's your strategy piece, right? The second pillar is probably funding. How do you go around funding? Because frankly, strategy without funding is more about dreams than reality. You can dream up whatever strategy, but if you don't have the budget to build it, it's not going to be built. And then on top of that, they're interconnected. You have the budget, and a lot of time the budget is this. Yeah, you might have a strategy that requires many millions of dollars, but the budget is much smaller. Well, so be it. You got to adjust the strategy to meet the budget. And I think the third pillar is governance. How do you build a framework where every idea becomes handled as a factory? It's not a one-off. I'm trying to approach this idea this way, that idea that way. Back to our plant analogy, there are a lot of spikes and a lot of turns. And if you are not building that process where you grab each one of them in a consistent manner and you know exactly how to do it so you don't run into those objects, life is going to be a lot easier. And to me, those are the three pillars that make a difference between a program and a science exercise or a one-off attempt.
That's right. Great point, especially around making it a program and, you know, not just a science experiment. And, you know, I feel in many cases we're likely going to see more of these science experiments if people are not yet following that three-step approach, because, you know, hey, here's a new technology, we need to try that out. We've seen it with Gen AI. We're now seeing that with agentic AI, although I think that's still in its infancy when it comes to evaluation. So, you know, your words of wisdom definitely are important here. Now, you know, I also think it's harder than ever to put a proper governance around using AI in a business. You have team members that might already use AI apps on their phones. They might be putting confidential data in there and what have you, especially if you try to clamp it down from a corporate point of view and you say, you're not allowed to use Gen AI because we're afraid you put data there. Like, chances are people are starting to use apps on their own phones and they're still going to put company data in there. And, you know, training can be an effective aspect to raise that awareness. But how do you see IT leaders handling, you know, that part of AI adoption or reckoning that it's here? How do we deal with that now?
Right, that's a great question. And again, I don't know if one size fits all, but I would start with something as basic as employee education. I just hang up the phone right prior to this when I was talking to new WESCO employees, and I was talking about the jobs of the future. I was talking about, hey, here's what we can do. Here's how automation can help you. Hopefully, those bits of education coming from me, coming from my peers, I'm definitely not the only one in the company doing that, should help the employees to understand where IT is coming from, where business is coming from, where everybody is coming from, and the lines of caution. Yes, there are tremendous benefit to AI. Yes, there are significant risks to AI. There is security, there is compliance, there is biases, there is data availability. But as you educate the employees, a couple of things happen. One is the pipeline of the opportunities become more realistic. How often do we get approached by an employee saying, hey, I want to build AI model that will do something? And you start asking the questions, do we have the data? No, not really. Do we have the process? No, we don't really have a process. Do we have good understanding of how things connect? Well, you're AI guy. You should be able to figure it out. Well, it doesn't work that way, right? On the flip side of it, to your point, IT cannot be the constant naysayer. So they need to be, that can, in my opinion at least, they need to be a very consistent framework. here are the X things that IT is looking for before they allow an AI solution. And it has to do with security. It has to do with privacy. It has to do with handling data. It has to do with every aspect that IT and security and infrastructure are concerned about. It also has to do with tool proliferation. How many IDP software programs can we have? Everybody seems to have an IDP solution. Well, if we have 30 companies doing intelligent document processing for us, are we gaining anything, or do we want to standardize in a handful? So all those different things are important. All those different things come from IT. The financial calculation needs to be, again, the same yardstick. This is back to my governance standpoint. If you have that yardstick that says, this program, if we do this project, we're going to save X, that kind of determines the budget for building the implementation. The implementation should not be more than X. Otherwise, it's a negative ROI implementation right there, right? And then if you get all those pieces together, you have the IT governance saying, here's what we need in order to allow it. You have business employees who are educated enough to bring the real examples and to be able to separate the hype from reality. And you have the consistent metrics on the value that it brings. Program becomes a little bit easier. Again, it's the difference between the science exercise and yelling and the loudest voice gets the project versus, well, we approach it methodically. We know the ROI, we know the governance, we know the strategy. Let's go build it. And if it all fits together, it becomes that factory setting.
So how do you do that? How do you get into that rhythm? Do you set up a formal program? Do you meet on a regular basis? Who do you invite? What do you review? How?
Again, I don't right. I don't know if our example would work for every company. What we do is we do meet on a regular basis. We do have intakes. We do have, prior to intakes, worked very diligently and very hard to build the rules of engagement. And I will speak from my experience on intelligent automation program, more on the RPA side, since I've been doing that since 2019. We met, we built the framework, we tweaked the framework, we got the framework. Every new idea, I can get it through approvals in a matter of minutes, literally. We're not there with AI yet. It takes longer, but that's the inspiration. There got to be that matrix that you need to populate to say, does it fit? And if the answer is yes, it fits on every account, it just goes. If the answer is yes, except for this one point, we need to discuss just this one point. But you got to make sure that the boundaries are set, the boundaries don't move, and the boundaries are the boundaries. Business needs to respect the boundaries. I'm not IT security person. I may not understand all the implications. I cannot speak to everything around security. So I trust the professionals to do that. They tell me what needs to happen. I make it happen in order to move forward. That's part of the governance framework.
And how high do you bring that transparency in the organization if you collaborate with your business stakeholders to also show and demonstrate the value that your teams are bringing from an automation, from an AI point of view?
I think that there are two answers here. One is top-down approach. I do use every opportunity I can to talk to the executives and C-suite and their direct reports to talk about the programs, to promote the program, to strategize, to make sure they know about our existence and what we can deliver. I do the same thing, bottom-up approach, where most of the ideas come from the employees. And I want the employees to be our ambassadors. I want the employees to go to their managers, to their executives and say, look at this cool automations we built. Look at this cool agent bot, whatever solution it is that we implemented. Look how it helps us to hit the goals. I will not be able to speak the language of every executive. That's just not in the card. I'm not an HR professional. I'm not a legal professional. I'm not a sales professional. I'm not a supply chain professional. I know enough to be somewhat dangerous, but I'm not a professional there. So let the employees who do the work be my spokespeople. They will use the right language. They will communicate the ROI much better. My work is to provide that governance, the framework, the training, the implementations, and the support, but let the others do the sale. I think that's a lot more efficient and effective. But again, I might be in a unique position when I'm able to do it that way.
Yeah, I really love that, especially the part about empowering employees to identify where the opportunities in our business process, in the area that I'm deeply familiar with. And I remember last time you were on the show, we talked about from a center of excellence point of view, what do you need to do so your pipeline of ideas that doesn't dry up, right? That kind of goes hand in hand with that topic. Now,
Absolutely.
You mentioned governance, and who should own that AI governance, and what other teams do you need to have around the table? I think you already mentioned a few, but are there others than finance or HR that you have in your governance program?
Right. There are many players out there, and I don't have a good answer who should own it. I think it depends on the company. Some companies, it sits better with IT. Some companies, it might sit better with some sort of a value realization office and CFO organization. It might be the executive branch. It doesn't really matter where it sits. It's all about that collaboration, because ultimately there is a lot of input from the IT. It's the infrastructure, it's the security, it's the data. But there is also input from the data governance and data modeling and people that build AI models and people who understand the data and the technology. And there is input from the business. And ultimately, the ideas have to start from the business. Business need to want to de-automate. Coming to the business saying, hey, I'm from IT, I'm here to automate your work, is probably not ideal. Business is going to be very apprehensive. A lot of fears of job protection are out there. And a lot of them are probably unfounded, but it doesn't matter. They're still fears, and we still need to deal with change management. And I choose to deal with change management from the bottom up. So if the business brings the ideas to us and we want to do it, and not the business leader, but the employees within the business line, I know that they don't need the change management. Employees already happy to do it. Maybe we can steer it, maybe we can help them to scale it, maybe we can help them to think bigger. But to me, that's the part of it. So it's IT, it's the business. To your point, it's the CFO, it's somebody who can tell us how do you record the value in a consistent manner. So you don't have an AI project that saves millions of dollars, and those millions never hit the P&L, they never hit any financial statement, so those are imaginary dollars, right? It's fine to report it that way if that's what the controllership organization wants us to do, but most of the time they want us to report on the real dollars, and let's report within the numbers and the guidelines that they want us to report within. Saves time, save frictions, makes life easier. And employee education, it might be sitting within a business, within IT or somewhere else, but to me it's one of the staples. If you don't have employees know what to ask for, they will not ask for the right things. If you don't have the employees who know how the technology works, they will come with unrealistic expectations. Asking for the wrong thing, having unrealistic expectations is never useful.
Wow, there was so much good information in there. Let me pick out a few things. What I heard you say was we need to report on hard actual savings, not just the funny money that we shift around between business units, but how are we actually making impact to the business, to the P&L. That's what our business wants, and we can report it, and we should. So we show the real impact. I love that, because I think too many times we still see these sandbox projects or pilots. Let's figure out what we do with AI, and then maybe we roll it out and we see it's actually not that easy. But to your point, if you start with that from the very beginning, align it with your business strategy, take something that's measurable, that solves that problem, right? You don't even run into it. The other part I wanted to ask is, how do you get employees to that point that they are aware of what can the technology actually do, what is available at our disposal, and could this even be something that we can solve with technology? How do you do that?
It's all about that continuous education. I'm not a marketing person, but I've heard something talking about 3 touches to the person, like you need to pass that information at least 3 times before it sinks. I took that to heart and I try to do it more than 3 times. Every opportunity I get to talk to employees, to present, it could be a lunch and learn, it could be 5 minutes during the town hall. We have automation minute, if you will, where I just go in and present. I offer at every call, everything I do, hey, if you want to do targeted presentation for your employees, happy to do it. It's up to us who understand the technology and can speak about it not in the IT language, but in a language that business can relate to and understand, to be the ambassadors of the technology. It will not happen on its own. And employees are bombarded by advertisement. And that advertisement, with all the right intentions, create a very unrealistic picture we're going to put AI in place for your organization that will reconcile every invoice. We're going to put AI into your organization that is going to take care of all the recruitment. P2P is going to be handled by our AI agent. How often do we see that on LinkedIn feeds? How often do we see that during the presentations? Equipping the employees about it, talking about it. And again, just right before this call, I was talking about Gartner's hype curve to new employees in WESCO, saying, look, when you get a new presentation about technology, think where it falls into that hype curve. Is it on peak of the inflated expectation, or is it within the chart of disillusionment? It doesn't have to be that terminology, but it gives you some sort of a framework to talk about, look, this is what is needed. This is how you identify the reality versus hype. And by the way, employee, if you bring to me something that sounds great, but we can never implement it, nobody wins.
Right. Yeah.
So if you know that it all blocks, let's talk about it upfront and see how we can deal with it.
Yeah.
There's no magic in that technology. Again, a lot of folks try to pretend that AI is some sort of a magical tool that does a lot of things. In a way it is, but for the reality is, you need the data, you need the process, you need all the foundations for that magic to work. Checking for that foundation and teaching the employees to check for that foundation is very effective from a standpoint that, again, we're not experts. Typically, the people who implement AI are not experts in the business problem.
Yeah.
So we cannot say if that foundation is solid. We need employees to help us with it.
That's awesome. Maxim, there's been so many great pieces of information, so many nuggets that you've shared in the last 20, 25 minutes. And I was wondering if you can summarize the key 3 takeaways for our audience today.
I wish I had your LinkedIn post from yesterday open. You summarized it really well.
Yes.
but I think the reality is pretty simple, right? Those 3 pillars are there. You have the summary. You need to have the strategy. You have to have the vision where the technology is going. And building 10 bots is not a good strategy. Freeing up 10 FTEs is not a good strategy. The strategy needs to be about the technology, measurable impact of that technologies, and the strategy needs to be something that you're willing and going to execute and include that North Star. Where do you see it going, and how do we get there from where we are to where we want to be? Within that strategy, we want to make sure that we are supported by funding and we know how to be funded, how to execute it. And then the governance. The governance is a key from a standpoint that you cannot treat each project as a one-off. It has to be an autopilot. And if it's an autopilot, there is no friction between IT and business and everybody else. Everybody expects and respects those boundaries and follows them. It become easier. You spend less time arguing, more time doing, and that's the goal. And the last thing I will say, maybe it's number 4, is measure twice, cut once. Prep all these things. Figure out the strategy, the governance, everything else before you buy the licenses, before you sign the agreement, before you start implementing. It makes life a lot easier and a lot less mistakes are getting made. So those would be my summaries.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Folks, we're at the end of the show. Thank you so much, Maxim, for joining us today and for sharing your experience with us. It was a pleasure having you on again.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Wonderful. And folks, for those of you in the audience, see you next time for What's the Buzz. Bye-bye.